and that there are beings and avatars who understand the deepest levels of cosmic law and can work with these cosmic laws, then I do believe in miracles, that they're capable of doing stuff that to the rest of us look like ridiculously miraculous. But they're not miracles in that sense, because that's how the cosmos is set up.
I'd like to welcome to the show Father Seán ÓLaoire. How you doing, Father Seán?
I'm doing really good, Alex. It's lovely to meet you.
It is such a pleasure meeting you as well, my friend. You and I have very similar beginnings, if you will. We both kind of came up in the Catholic Church. Like I was joking with you prior, I did not go as far as you did. I got off the ship earlier, and you said, no, I'm going to keep going. I'll signal back and let you know what I find. But
that was before we hit the iceberg.
That's before you hit the iceberg. Exactly. Your work that you've been doing for all these years. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about how you began your spiritual journey in the Catholic Church, and then where have you, and it seems as the Buddha behind you and the lovely island beads behind you, not so much that I didn't see that in the Vatican as much. So you've changed a bit along the way. So can you tell the audience a little bit of how you've started your journey and where you've gotten to here today?
Sure. So I was born in 1946 in Cork City in Ireland. And for the first 6 years of my life, I lived with my paternal grandparents, and my great-grandmother was still alive. She was alive until I was nearly 10 years of age. She was this small, squat little woman. She was as wide as she was high, and she was blind in one eye. But she had this extraordinary mystical vision. She was the greatest mystic I've ever come across. So she had this extraordinary devotion to Mother Mary. For her, Mother Mary was more real to her than you are to me, Alex, right now. So she would talk aloud to Mother Mary throughout the day. And as the first great-grandchild, I was privy to these conversations. I presume this was the norm. And so she had this just extraordinary relationship with Mother Mary. So I'll tell you a funny incident. She would go to Mass every single morning in a Franciscan church in Cork City. And then at Christmas time, there was another church called St. Peter's and Paul's, and it had a life-size creche, life-size figures of Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the donkey and whatever. But there were these big, big steep steps going up to it. And she'd go after Mass in the Franciscan church. At Christmas time, she'd bring me with her to visit the creche. And she'd kneel down and she'd be talking to Mary. Now, there was a guy who figured this out. He saw her doing this on a regular basis. He decided he'd play a trick on her. So he ran up ahead of us, hid himself in the straw next to the baby Jesus. And my great-grandmother goes up and she's talking to Mary. And all of a sudden, this little pipsqueak voice says, "You're always asking for stuff. You come in here every day and you're always asking for stuff." And my great-grandmother looks at the child Jesus and says, "Be quiet, child. I'm talking to your mother."
That's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So you started off with this kind of, that was the norm for you.
Yeah, it was the norm. But then at age 6, I'm living with my maternal grandparents, and my grandfather on that side, whom I call Daddy Jim, was a Druid. He was a great musician, a great Irish step dancer, and he was the greatest storyteller I ever came across. So he filled me up with all the ancient mythology of Ireland, the Tuatha Dan and Fionn Mahol, Cuchulainn and people like that. So I had the two sides, but I had the ancient kind of pagan past, and I had the mystical kind of Christianity. So that was kind of like they were the foundation stones of my spirituality.
So when you say Druid, I've never met a Druid. I'm assuming you're one of the first that I've met. Can you explain to the audience because as a Catholic, this is all sacrilege. Obviously, we should all be burning in hell for even talking about mysticism or things like this. But can you explain to the audience a little bit about what a Druid is, where the ancient pagan spirituality came from, and how it affected Christianity, and how it all kind of mixed in together, because it is much older. Am I wrong?
Much older. Much older.
How many thousands of?
It's gone back at least to 1000 BCE, before the Common Era. At least back as far as that. Now, it depends on whether you're looking kind of at geographical and historical records, or you're looking at mythological records. So, for instance, in Gaelic, we have mythology about a place called, we have two names for it in Gaelic. Sometimes we call it Tír Fáthán, which means the land under the waves. And sometimes we call it Tír na nÓg, which is the land of the ever young. And according to this myth, there's a civilization under the Atlantic. Now, in some versions, that's going to be called Atlantis. In the Gaelic version, it's called Tír Fáthán, the land under the waves. And one theory is that the Celts came from there when Atlantis sank, that one group of them came eastwards and landed in Ireland, and inhabited Ireland. And they ruled Ireland for thousands of years. And then the Celts came about the year 600 BCE. And there were two great battles between what were called the Tuatha Dé Danann from Atlantis and the Celts, who probably came from Eastern Europe. And the Celts won both battles. So there was an agreement that they would divide the land of Ireland between the two of them. So it wasn't that one got the north and the other got the south, or one got the east and the other got the west, but rather that the Celts would inhabit Ireland over the ground, and the Tuatha Dé Danann would inhabit Ireland under the ground. So they shapeshifted, and they became the fairy folk of Ireland. And so, they changed shape.
The gnomes, the fairies, the gnomes, the fairies.
Elementals of all these kinds. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the Celts then there's a cross-fertilization that happens of spiritualities. And for the Druidic culture then, nature is really, really important. The love of nature and the appreciation of nature and of the feminine. So the feminine is really, really important in Druidical culture. And so you have storytelling, you've got music, you've got ceremonies of various kinds honoring the seasons. So we have 4 great seasons. We start 1st of February with what's called Imbolc, which is the Feast of St. Bridget, who was a Celtic goddess and also a Christian saint. And then on the 1st of May, you have what we call Bealtaine. You'll hear it mispronounced often as Beltane. That's the 1st of May. Then the 1st of August is called Lunasa. And the 1st of November is called Samhain. And so we divide the year into these 4 great periods. And it's interesting that for the Druids and the Celts, the year began with the darkening period. When the sun was getting smaller and smaller and smaller in the skies, that's the beginning of the year. And so it's that light is birthed out of darkness. For the Druidical culture, light and darkness are not enemy figures. Darkness is the fertile womb, which gestates and gives birth to light. And so it becomes really, really important then that we understand that they're not enemies. Light and dark are not enemies. And the same thing with the day. The day for the Celts begins with the sundown. Yeah, and so it's the evening, 6 p.m. our time is when the day starts. So you get this kind of reversal of the understanding that light and dark are not enemies. They're dancing together. One needs the other. That one is the fertile ground in which all life is conceived, carried, and given birth. And then light is what emanates from that.
So to take it back to the Atlantic time, the Atlantis myth, that makes sense because, from the point of Atlantis, the myths are that they went over to Egypt and there's Thoth over there, and they spread around when the city or the land underneath the ocean, they spread around and created a bunch of different civilizations in the Mesoamerica and so on. So that would mean that Atlantis, the Druids would actually be much, much older. We're talking about probably 12,000 years old, if it's from its original origins, way, way before Jesus was even a glint in Mary's eye, as they say.
Right. Yeah.
So that's fascinating because I've heard about, and here in the States, I heard about this, and please confirm, is it true that you can actually get certified to find, is it gnomes or some sort of like some sort of mythical creature that we consider mythical? There's like a certification in Ireland, and it might be Wales, it might be Scotland. Please forgive me, but there's a certification that you could go to school and learn how to, catch them or show or to check them. Or please tell me I'm out of my mind, or is this true, sir?
I'm sure I haven't heard of that, Alex, but I'm sure if there's any way of kind of creating credentials or making money out of an idea, somebody came
Of
up with that.
course.
Yeah.
I gotta believe, like, if you want to catch gnomes, you're gonna have to get a certification.
Right.
But I heard about this. I did look it up, and it did seem
Oh,
correct.
yeah.
I'm sure that's not part of the tradition, but that there is enough market that thing exists, and someone's actually paying money for it. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a story about my grandfather used to tell me lots of stories about. They're sometimes called the Tuatha Danann, which means the people of the goddess Dana. So Dana may have been an Atlantean princess that was part of the first wave that came eastwards and that settled in Ireland. And so they live now underground. And so there are areas in Ireland, they're called fairy forts. They're round circular mounds of earth under which the Tuatha Danann live. So my grandfather told me a story one time, and he's my grandfather, so he wouldn't tell me lies. He's about a 7-year-old boy, and they live about 2 miles from Blarney, where the famous Blarney Castle is. Yeah. And there's a big fairy fort in Blarney. And it's evening time, and his mother sends him down to the shop, which is about 2 miles away, to get a bag of sugar for the tea. And my grandfather, he's about 7 years old. He's wandering down to the village, gets the 2 pounds of sugar, and he's on his way back. And it's now getting night, and the moon is coming out, and he hears this brilliant music. And he was always a great musician, even as a child, great musician. So he's wondering, where's the music coming from? And he sees this blink of light coming from the hillside, and he goes up, and being a small boy, he can see in. And underneath, there's this huge, big gathering of fairies, and they're having what we call a shiamsa, a feast, song and dance and whatever. And he's looking in, and somebody spots him, and they beckon him to come in. So he crawls in through it, and he's delighted with the music. And they ask him, can you play music? And he says, yeah, I can play the fiddle. So they give him a fiddle, and he's playing the fiddle. And so at the end of the shiamsa, they're going to have a cup of tea. And then they discover they have no sugar. And my grandfather said, I've got a pound of sugar here. So he spreads the sugar, everybody gets a spoon of sugar, they have the tea together, and then he crawls out back home, and it's bright daylight. And the whole village is out looking for him. He's been missing for 7 days. And his mother says, where's the bag of sugar?
Let me ask you something, Seán. In the concept of fairies and gnomes and these elemental, creatures, have come up multiple times in some near-death experiences.
Yes.
In some, and obviously in some more pagan or Wicca, the Wicca, which is, I think, an offspring of the pagan Druid lineage, if you will. What I've heard, and this is something I've heard from a quantum physicist, it's so fascinating, that the parallel lives and the parallel realities that we all live in, that there are multiple versions of this conversation going on right now, and there's multiple timelines, and there's a timeline where you said I got off the ship early and you did not become a father, and you did other things, and that veil between realities is getting thinner and thinner. And some of these quote unquote other beings or creatures that are popping in and popping out, and popping out. And that's where we see these kind of things. From your point of view, what do you think of that? And from your studies and everything that you've done, how much validity, I know you can't prove it, but how much validity do you think these kind of ideas have?
I think they're hugely important. I believe completely in it. So, when we think about what kind of proof can we adduce to kind of back up any argument, there's a whole branch of philosophy which is called epistemology, which answers the question, how do we know what we know? And basically, there are 3 ways we know what we know. The first one is some authority figure tells us and we believe them. The television tells us, or the priest tells us, or the scientist tells us. That's one know. The second way we know is we experience stuff for ourselves. And the third way, we figure stuff out on our own. We put pieces of the puzzle together and we create the jigsaw puzzle. And for me, no one of them is more important than the other. So the kind of materialistic science only believes, what the sensorium can deliver to us. But I believe that, we are multi-tiered creatures. When you look at the Hindu notion of body, for instance, we exist at 7 different levels. There's the physical body, which is vibrating between infrared and ultraviolet, from 400 to 700 nanometers. We can see that and touch it. And then there's the etheric body, which is vibrating at a slightly higher frequency. So now you can see somebody's aura. Then there's the kind of astral body, which is vibrating at a higher level still. And it's the body we inhabit when we're dreaming. So there is no time, there is no space. I can dream tonight about my grandfather who died in 1956 and lived 6,000 miles from me, and instantaneously I'm there. So at the astral level, there's neither distance nor time. And I think, according to Hinduism, that's the level of the self in which all of the experiences of this incarnation just ending are archived until I come back on the next time. And then the fourth level is the mental body. It's kind of Plato's ideal realm, the place from which we download all great ideas. And then the fifth level is the psychic body, the place where we discover clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, precognition, all these kinds of things. The sixth level then will be the soul self, which is the archives of all of the incarnations I've ever lived. And then the final level is a God consciousness. Now, I believe that there are 7 levels of the physical planet itself, that this planet has 7 bodies as well. And here's how I construct it for myself. I think that the third rock from the sun in this galaxy, that we call planet Earth, it started out 4.6 billion years ago as a physiosphere, just a rock, simple rock. And then at some stage, it developed an atmosphere, another sheath surrounding the physiosphere. So the physiosphere can be studied by physics. The atmosphere can be studied by kind of biology, perhaps. Then the third level is the biosphere around the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is like the womb of the earth. It was necessary to create an atmosphere or a womb in order to gestate life. And then it gestated firstly flora and then fauna. Then there's the fourth level, and we're halfway through that at the moment. And Tyler Desjardins called that the noosphere, the sheath of consciousness that surrounds the biosphere. And now we have this through the internet, instant connection all over the world. But it's a very dangerous place to be. The journey from the biosphere to the noosphere is fraught with danger, because we can develop technologies that will utterly destroy ourselves and the planet itself. So we have to navigate really, really well in this phase. Now, if we manage this, there are 3 more stages afterwards for the planet. The next stage, I call it the animasphere. Anima, as in the Latin soul, that there's a soul. The planet has a soul. So there's a soul sphere. And then above that is the pneumosphere, pneuma being spirit. And then above that, finally, I would call it the cosmosphere. And so there are beings, extra dimensionals, extraterrestrials of various kinds all over. And it's a question of, can I shift my state of consciousness? Can I go into an altered state in which I can see into other dimensions or experiences of other beings, and we're surrounded by them? So we have to shift our focus in order to see them. So it's not where we look that's important, it's how we look that's important. If I don't know how to look, I can look everywhere and find nothing. If I do know how to look, it doesn't matter where I look, I'll find everything. And so these elementals are as real as you and I are. But the question is, can I enter the state of consciousness in which I can perceive that other level of reality? Because it's completely real.
Which is very similar to what the yogis were able to do.
Yes.
The Yoganandas, exactly. The Babajis of the world, they were able to raise their consciousness to a place where they can go. I mean, there's stories of Yogananda going into meditation for 2 or 3 days, and he would tell his followers, just whisper in my ear if you need me to come back. And he would be gone. He would be gone in the astral field, and God knows where other realms he was in. And he would come back, and to be able to see, like in Babaji is the ultimate example of that, being able to completely play with reality in a way that we just don't know how to yet. Right. And Jesus was able to do that. Buddha was able to do that to a certain extent. They were able to manipulate their environment. And very high-end highly developed yogis also levitation, biolocation, all the things that are known. I have to ask you, Seán, I mean, as a recovering Catholic as myself, at what point when it's so difficult, and I ask this question because there are a lot of people who are still, if they're watching this show, they have questions.
Yes.
So if they're watching this, they're curious about something, whether to be angry at what we're about to talk about or to be enlightened by about what they're about to talk about. And again, I always tell people religion has its place, and people, if it wasn't for the Catholic Church, I probably wouldn't have been exposed to the idea of God, the idea of Jesus, idea of something larger than myself without that education. Yes. It came with some baggage.
Yes.
And I still feel guilty about it.
Right.
But As a good Catholic,
Yes.
you always feel guilty as a good Catholic. But when you started to investigate outside of what you've been taught, and you went really down deep that rabbit hole, in becoming a priest and becoming a father, what was it like when your mind started to be exposed to other ideas that are completely against everything you've been taught? There had to have been a struggle within you, or was it just you were just like, I'm open? How did that work for you? Because a lot of people listening right now are at the exact point where you were when you decided to read a book or go down other roads.
It's a great question, Alex. So I told you I was under these two great influences as a little child growing up: mystical Christianity and kind of pagan, kind of druidical mythology. And so I spent 8 years in the seminary. I'm ordained at age 26. I sent to Kenya. I spent 14 years in Kenya, and I fell in love with it immediately. Now, I was always fascinated by mythology. In fact, the year between my junior and senior years in high school, I spent 3 months in an area in Ireland where Gaelic is still the mother tongue. And I was collecting proverbs. In Gaelic, we call them Seán ÓLaoire, which means ancient words. And I would collect the proverbs from the elders in the village, and I'd ask them, in what context would you use this particular proverb? And I collected 432 proverbs during the summer. And I remember one old man saying to me, he said, if Christianity had never come to Ireland, we could live according to the proverbs. He was absolutely right, because stories and mythology are the archived wisdom of a culture. Now, they're put in story form because if you express something philosophically or scientifically, the terms change over the years and they don't mean what they originally meant. You tell somebody a story and they can unpack it, in a way in which is relevant for the circumstances in which they find themselves. So I got to Africa at age 26, ostensibly to convert people to Roman Catholicism. And I fall in love. I have the privilege of learning 4 different Kenyan languages and the mythologies and the folklore. And soon I begin to say to people, if Christianity had never come to Africa, you could live according to your proverbs, because the proverbs are the distillation of the mythology of a culture. So the wisdom is inherent in it. And I differentiate between wisdom and knowledge. For me, knowledge is data that are generated by the sensorium and processed by the brain, whereas wisdom is data that are generated by the soul and processed by the heart. It's a totally different phenomenon. And so beautiful. When you go into wisdom and you process at the heart level, on the basis of soul inspiration, you have access to a whole trove of information and data you don't normally have. And so now I'm beginning to say, let's trade. I want to become what Carl Jung called a Gnostic intermediary. A Gnostic intermediary is somebody who's so well versed in 2 very different systems that he can cross-fertilize them to their mutual benefit. So I say, okay, here are the stories that I can tell you from Ireland. You tell me the stories from Kenya, and we'll see what comes of it. And so over time, I then begin to radically reassess. I lived right on the equator, literally on the equator, for 14 years. And so it was 12 hours days, 12 hours night. So at nighttime, I didn't have electricity. I had candles. There's no bloody way I could go to sleep at 6 o'clock in the evening, being Irish. So I spent a lot of my time creating what I call my own personal cosmology. So one by one, I'd examine the tenets of my belief system and say, if I hadn't been born Catholic, if I'd been born Hindu or Buddhist, would I believe this? For instance, if I were born Hindu, would I believe that there's a man in Rome called the Pope who wears a high hat and that he's infallible? There's no bloody way I would believe that if I were Hindu. So, okay, let's dump that one. Yeah. And so one by one, I'm taking, if I were born Buddhist and I heard, do unto others as you would like them to do to you, would I still believe it? Absolutely. Okay. We put that in a different bucket. So I created 2 buckets. Ones that would make sense to me, no matter what background I came out of, and ones that would only make sense to me if I were indoctrinated in a particular culture. And then I created a brand new cosmology on the basis of the stuff that I saved. I harvested that and then created a cosmology that could make sense to me. Now, a cosmology should do 4 things for me. The first thing is it should make my soul sing. If I've got a personal cosmology that's adequate, it should make my soul sing. Secondly, it should stretch me out of my comfort zone. Thirdly, it should be able to explain everything I experience, extraterrestrials, elementals, whatever. It should have a place for those. And fourthly, it needs to be regularly updated as I have new experiences. So it's a thing that grows. And so I've been saying that for many, many years to my own community now in Palo Alto. Every one of you is responsible for creating your own cosmology. That's your life journey. You can't just borrow from somebody else. You can be inspired by somebody else's cosmology, but you have to create your own brand new cosmology. So I spent 14 years in Africa doing that. And then I came to the States in 1988, and I continued to do it. And very, very quickly, I ran into problems with the closure.
Yes, they don't like when you they don't like new ideas. I got in trouble with the nuns when I go, so Jesus, last we heard he was 12, and then he shows up and he's 30, 31, 32, 30 something, 30, yeah, 30. And what happened? Oh, we don't talk about that. But those are the best years. Like, was he a troublemaker? He was a teenager. Was he a bad teenager? I doubt that he was just, walking around turning fish into, loaves and, turning water into wine at 15. What was going on? Because the one thing that I discovered in my journeys and research into spirituality is that no master shows up fully formed. No master. None in history has ever come fully formed. Not Buddha, not Jesus, not Muhammad, not Babaji, not anybody. They all have to go through the process, the same process that you and I are going through. So that opened up the door, as opposed to the doctrine of a lot of more traditional dogmatic religions, that is like, no, they're infallible. They came fully formed. They basically created idols, essentially, as opposed to understanding, no, these are representations. These are what is possible. And that's what the yogis talked about. That's what Jesus talked about. That's what Buddha talked about, which is my next question to you is, you've mentioned that Jesus and Buddha, their teachings are very similar in many ways. But you've gone as far as saying that they might be the same soul that got reincarnated. Because in my research going into the Council of Nicaea, when they were writing the Bible, which people still lose their mind when they hear that for the first time. I'm like, they pulled books out of it. The origin story of Jesus is quite similar to the origin story of Buddha. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, my friend.
I created a mayhem in the church when I first kind of suggested that the guy we know as Jesus of Nazareth was a reincarnation of the guy we knew as the Buddha 550 years before. But it makes perfect sense to me. I think that every era needs an infusion of extraordinarily advanced spirituality. And that, in fact, I just finished delivering a 4-day retreat to my community, in which I talked about a life between life sessions that I underwent in 2006 with a great friend of mine called Matt McKay. And I experienced, in a total 4-hour session. And I had an encounter with Jesus as part of that. And one of the things I said to him, joking with him, I says, dude, come back already. We're in deep doo-doo here. And so, and he cracked up. And so for me, I believe not only that he may be the reincarnation, but that great souls, in fact, even lesser souls, we multitask. We have parallel lifetimes. And when people ask me, how is that possible? How is it that I don't know the other lifetimes I'm having? And the example I use is, I take like a movie star like Sean Penn. I love some of his movies. And I say, suppose I were to put on a Sean Penn day in Palo Alto, and I were to prevail upon 10 different movie theaters to show a different movie of Sean Penn. And in one of them is a Dead Man Walking, where he's the last day of his life. He's about to be executed. What's his name in that? Do you remember what his name was?
I don't remember his name, but I do remember the movie. And then Fast Times at Ridgemont High is another one. And
right. And the other one that I loved was I Am Sam, where he's a mentally retarded adult, where he's raising a very brilliant little 7-year-old girl. Now, so I was putting on 10 movies of Sean Penn, and they all start at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Now, the guy, I Am Sam, has no idea whatsoever that there's another guy on death row just about to be executed. But Sean Penn, who's the actor, is aware that he's playing both these roles simultaneously right now. So the actor is aware of it, but the characters are not aware of it. So you're aware only of the character you're playing as Alex, and I'm only aware of the character I'm playing as Sean. But your soul self is aware of all of the other roles you may be simultaneously playing in order to kind of parallel process or speed up the evolution of your own soul. So I think characters like Jesus particularly, because the soul is infinite, no matter how many pieces you break off it, it's still infinite. And that you can distribute that energy over parallel lifetimes. And because there is no time at the other side, parallel does not mean that they're contemporaneous. So I could right now be playing a role as Seán, an Irish Catholic priest, in 2024, and simultaneously I'm playing a parallel life in North Africa as a slave girl in the 1300s, or as an astronaut in the 26th century someplace else. And I'm doing it right now, because there is no time when we step off this three-dimensional reality of this little planet. And so I think that the great avatars, particularly, they're multi-processing, in parallel lifetimes, and that the really great souls keep coming back because they take a kind of a bodhisattva vow that although they've worked off all their own personal karma, they're coming back for the rest of us, to wake up the rest of us.
Yes, and that's what I've heard from the Vedic traditions as well, that Babaji specifically, he's just hanging out here. He's been here, I think they say 2,500 years or something along those lines, and works with Jesus and works with, all the great ascended masters. To do that, it's hard. It's fascinating because I've said the same thing so many times. It's like, well, if I was born Hindu,
yes,
I would have been Hindu. If I would have been born Jewish, I would have been Jewish.
Absolutely.
It's about the programming. It's about the programming within the first 7 years of your life, essentially. If what Bruce Lipton says is accurate, and I think it is. That, I mean, I was born Catholic, and that was just like you and your great grandmother. It's just the way it is. I'm assuming there's another timeline somewhere that you were born atheist into an atheist family. And you have no spirituality whatsoever, and you're right now in Vegas doing something that you shouldn't be doing.
Can you buy me a ticket?
Some sort of debauchery is happening. I'm probably there with you, sir. I'm probably there with you. But this idea of parallel lives, because I have such a unique perspective of talking to so many people from so many different walks of life, I'm looking, like you were saying, to put the puzzle pieces together. I want to see the whole elephant. I want to see the whole elephant. And not many people see the whole elephant. They just see the tail or the trunk or the toe or the ear, and they say that's the elephant. So putting it all together, this idea that there is no past life, that there is no future life, that all lives are happening at the same time, is hard for us to comprehend.
Absolutely.
Your idea, your analogy of the movie theater with Sean Penn's brilliant. I have another one that a friend of mine gave me, which is like, if you're watching television, well, there's about 500 other shows going on at the exact same time as that you're watching this one show. But you're not aware of the other shows because you haven't tuned into those shows.
Exactly.
So, and then if your head really wants to hurt, then you start talking about parallel realities and different timelines and the multiverse, and then understand that it's infinite. How do you wrap your head? What advice do you give somebody to wrap their head about the things that we're just talking about, which, by the way, now is being reinforced by quantum physics?
Absolutely. So here's one of the things I say, Alex, that, I believe that when we volunteer for incarnation, and we do volunteer, and we make what I call preconception contracts with a group of other souls that will play significant roles in their lives, on planet Earth. But when we volunteer to kind of come into this kind of physical plane, this 3D dense reality, we're subject to 4 limitations. The first one is that we have to trade our cosmic being for this little 150-pound, spacesuit that I'm occupying right now. That's the first limitation. The second one, I have to trade cosmic consciousness for this little tiny laptop that I'm carrying between my ears. The third one is that because this laptop is so small, I cannot grok the entire gestalt of even incarnation. So I have to break it up into bite-sized pieces and process them sequentially, giving rise to the illusion of time. And then the fourth one is that there's amnesia created just before we parachute into planet Earth. Grandmother God pinches our nostrils and creates amnesia, because part of the function of incarnation is to figure out why we're here. If we were given the answers, it'd be like going to school and getting the answers to a test so you don't have to study. So there's amnesia created. So these are the 4 kinds of limitations on us. So time is a total illusion. There is no time outside of that. So everything is the now. But we come into time, and then my experience is that we break it up into 7 pieces. Two versions of the past, 2 versions of the present, and 3 versions of the future. So the first version of the past is what actually happened, what really happened, historically. And we're influenced by that because we're the product of it. There's a second version of the past, and that's kind of which was written by the victors, the historians. And that's another version of the past. It may not be accurate, but there's a huge influence in who we are right now and how we're behaving. So there's two versions of the past. There's two versions of the present because there's what's really happening in our world right now, and we're influenced by that. And then there's a second version of the present, which is the propaganda that we're being kind of bombarded with on a regular basis, and that influences how we experience right now. So that's two versions of the present. And then there are three versions of the future. There is the version of a kind of a deterministic future over which we have no control. That is kind of, it's been laid out, kind of grin and bear it. No, I don't believe that for a moment. So there are two other versions of the future. One is the probable future, the likely outcome if we continue to do what we're doing right now as individuals or as a global community. And then there's the possible future. What could transpire if we change what we're doing right now? So I mix these 7 pieces together, and that's the jumble of, how we try to deal with the illusion of time. But it's all illusory because everything is in the eternal now. It's like another example I use is if I, download a book from Amazon, let's say War and Peace, 600 pages of the book, and I can download it in like 10 seconds, but it's going to take me a month to read it. But everything that I'm going to read is already contained in the book. Now, I have a friend of mine actually who loves to read detective stories, but she'll always read the last chapter first. She wants to know who done it, and then she'll go back and she'll read the book. So she doesn't want the kind of the anxiety of trying to figure out who done it. Now, the truth is, we know who done it. It's all there already. The question is, do you want to skip to the last chapter, or do you want to enjoy the process of reading the book? Do you want to kind of enjoy incarnation and the alleged separation from source, which is an illusion, but enjoy the apparent separation, or do you want to just hang out with God and never have any adventures? So we are the way in which God experiences. That's the entire purpose of incarnation. Because if you take, for instance, the Christian version of Trinity or the Hindu version, like Father, Son, and Spirit, or Sat Chit Ananda, that's a closed system. So if God is all that exists, God cannot generate experiences. There's nothing to experience. And so God kind of self-fractures into what Hebrew will call netzvotzim, bite-sized pieces of herself. We call these souls. And so God fractures. So we got these holographic fractals. And a hologram is an entity that contains the totality of itself in every one of its component parts. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. And so we got all these scaled holograms all over, which are ways in which God experiences outside of herself. So we're like bees in a hive that the queen sends out to gather pollen and honey and stories. And we come back in the evening and we don't just store the pollen and the honey, we tell stories to each other. And so we're the way in which God experiences. And that's why incarnation is important, with the apparent separation from source, which is only apparent.
There's a couple times I've said this on the show, and I've gotten comments against it. And I want to hear your point of view on this. My take is that we are God. We are parts of God.
Yes.
We are fractals of God, experiencing the universe, just like you said. But because of programming and dogma, it's beyond the capability of some people to think that we are divine creatures. I said, we are not crap. Do you think we just, there's crappy people and there's good people? We are all made of the same stuff, experiencing different storylines.
Absolutely.
Essentially, correct? We are different actors playing in different movies, and sometimes they interact. Sometimes you're the bad guy, sometimes you're the good guy, and so on and so forth. But people cannot get past, a lot of people cannot get past this idea because of the programming that they have gotten throughout their life. What would you say to someone who tells you that it's impossible? We are not God. We are of God, but we are not God. There is only one Almighty God, and we are, how dare you even insinuate that we are part or anywhere near God? And then if you start getting into the different religions, their God is not the guy with the white beard at the top, the thing that Da Vinci or Leonardo da Vinci painted, the guy with the long beard in the sky pointing, touching. He's not that guy. It's either Jesus or Muhammad or Moses or Abraham, or there's so many other godlike people. What would you say to people who having a struggle with this part of our conversation?
Right. So there's a statement I came up with years and years and years ago that I repeat constantly to my community. And it goes like this. I say, the life is a dream that the ego is having, and the ego is a dream that the soul is having, and the soul is a dream that spirit is having, and spirit is a dream that God is having. So everything that exists is simply God in drag. There is nothing except God. So, but God self-fractures. So we're divine at our core. In fact, the last prayer I say every night just as I'm going to sleep, I say, I am love residing in the sacred heart of my Heavenly Father. I am light residing in the sacred heart of Mother Mary. I am logos residing in the sacred heart of Jesus. I am life residing in the sacred heart of the Holy Spirit. And I am laughter residing in the sacred hearts of those who are awake. So for me, there is only God. Everything else is just an articulation of source.
That's absolutely beautiful. Very well put, my friend. Now, you did say something a minute ago where that you were bringing us down to where we are in the spacesuit, and we have this little laptop in our brains. I always joke that we just don't have the hardware to process a lot of these ideas and concepts that we're talking about. Like, there's no past, there's no future. God has always been, has never. There is no beginning or end to him, or him, her, it. You know what I'm saying? But I want to just dig in a little bit deeper to that, because most people live in their laptop.
Yes.
Most people live right here.
Yes.
But when you quiet the mind and you meditate and you start to disconnect from the laptop, you start to transcend the laptop. You leave the laptop and then open yourself up to that cosmic knowing that the near-death experiencers speak so much about, where they know everything all at once, and it's an instant download, and they have a complete comprehension of what quantum physics is. They have a complete all of this stuff, but we can't process that hard drive. It's impossible. It's essentially trying to put in a multiplayer game online that takes servers and servers, trying to put it back in 1984 floppy disk. It just won't work. So what can you dig in a little bit deeper to that idea?
Yeah. So for me, it is very important that we regularly, whatever method we employ, that we try to access altered states of consciousness, because this ratiocination, this idea that we can rationally explain the world. So I see that fundamentalist religion has shot itself in the head, and fundamentalist science has shot itself in the heart. And so we're faced with a God-shaped hole in the human psyche, because one is kind of a literalist interpretation of mystical reality, and the other is the belief system. There is no mystery outside of material science. So I think it's really, really important that people have practices that allow them to alter their states of consciousness. And I'm going to mention a few to you. One of them, obviously, is meditation. I think spending time in nature, just watching what nature does, how nature solves its problems. She's been doing this, nature has created life on planet Earth 3.7 billion years ago. There's no problem that nature faces that it can't overcome. So watching how nature deals with these issues, I'll spend time, literally I spend 4 hours one day watching a California poppy. Have you seen the California poppies?
Oh, of course. I've been to the poppy fields in California.
Yeah, right. So when they're coming for us, there's a little cone. It's like a little cone-shaped hat, green hat on it. And then as they begin to blossom, as they begin to expand, the hat goes higher and higher and higher, and finally it pops off, and then the petals open. And I literally spent 4 hours one day watching a single California poppy shed its cap. And I think I probably learned more, about an altered state of consciousness in that 4 hours than I did in, I've been meditating since I was 18, just watching that happen. So spending time in nature. The other thing I would say is spending time around little children, particularly under age 4 or 5, because they have just recently come through the veil. And what we claim, they're imaginary friends. They're only imaginary to us because we can't visualize them. But to the child, they're absolutely real. They're at a higher level of consciousness. And so they're interacting with beings, which are much closer to source than are we. So there are practices that we can engage in that will shift our state of consciousness. For some people, it's art form. For some people, it's dance. For some people, it's music. For other people, it's spending time in nature. For some people, it's spending time with little children. So whatever. So for some people, it's plant medicine, ayahuasca or whatever. And so in some senses, whatever allows you to alter your state of consciousness with the correct kind of agenda, that you're not just kind of going to entertain yourself, but that you're really seeking higher wisdom, that any practice that allows you to alter your state of consciousness, that's really important. And that only from a higher perspective can we see the significance of stuff at the ground level. So, for instance, there's a creek that runs through my property up here. It's called Pina Creek. And I spent, especially when I had my dog died a few years ago, but she and I would trek for hours and hours and hours. And I had many astral encounters down at the creek. And so I go down there in December of 2012, and there's a guy sitting on the banks of the creek. I've never seen anybody down there in all the time I've lived up here, 30 years now. And he's sitting with his legs dangling in the water, and he's chewing on a piece of grass, like an old farmer from Oklahoma, you know? And I knew I was seeing him in the astral realm. So I sit down beside him, and I pluck a piece of grass. I'm chewing a piece of grass myself. And in my mind, I asked the question, I wonder if he's going to tell me a story. And he turned to me, and he spoke aloud. He obviously read my mind, and he says, yeah, I will. Here's the story. And he told me a story about being an originator of life. He said, I've been all over the galaxy planting life on many, many different kinds of planets. And he said, we plant them, we water them, we weed them, we genetically modify them, and I can tell exactly how life is going to progress until we give them free will. And then all bets are off. At that stage, I can't predict anymore how it's going to go down. Up to that, I can predict it. And he said, and I tell you where you're at right now. In your planet, you're at a trifurcation point, not just a bifurcation, but a trifurcation point. He said, Homo sapiens sapiens is at a stage where there's going to be a trifurcation into three groups. The first group he called Homo sociopathicus. And these are the tyrannical class, you know, the elite or the oligarchy, what word you want to give to them, who are grabbing the world's resources, whether it's a political agenda or economic agenda or a religious agenda. And that's, he called them Homo sociopathicus. The second group are being created by them, and he called it Homo artificialis. And he's talking about transhumanism, creating technology which can kind of program and hack human beings. That's the second group. And the third group he called Homo spiritualis. And he said, your job is to wake up and to refuse to become Homo artificialis and to kind of confront Homo sociopathicus. And so these are the kind of encounters when you alter your state of consciousness and you begin to visit into astral realms or higher realms, that now you have access to information and data and avatars and kind of teachers and healers that you're not going to read about in a book, or you're not going to see them on television. So having some kind of personal practices that allow you to volitionally alter your state of consciousness on a regular basis, that becomes really important. And that's my definition of imagination. Imagination is very different from fantasy. Fantasy is the ability to make up stuff that's not real. Imagination is the ability to intentionally alter my state of consciousness, enter into different dimensions, visit with energies and entities that reside there, learn from them, and bring that learning back and cross-fertilize it with earth knowledge.
So the thing is that it sounds that with these beings, and I've heard this so many different ways, is that beings, ascended masters, guides, angels, all sorts of different beings that and I use the word above us, different frequencies. They're at a different vibe of frequency than we are. They can't come down to this heavy frequency. We need to come up. They'll meet us halfway, but they're not going to be walking around the streets of New York tomorrow, generally speaking, unless they've incarnated. Is that, and when you are elevating your consciousness through meditation, through plant medicine, through everything you said, you are raising your vibration, raising your frequency to a place where you can interact with them.
Absolutely.
And when we sleep, our dreams, we do that so many times. Is that right?
Totally. So, for instance, last Sunday was Easter Sunday, so I'm preaching about the resurrection of Jesus, and I got a theological theory about it, I got a scientific theory, I got metaphors for it, and I got stories about it. So for me, why was it that the disciples of Jesus often didn't recognize him after his resurrection? Mary of Magdala thought he was the gardener. The two guys on the road to Emmaus thought he was a stranger. And so why was it that sometimes they didn't recognize him? And the reason is that resurrection, the verb that's used in the Greek New Testament about Jesus appearing, the verb is not that anybody looking in the same direction is going to see him if he appears, but rather he chose to make himself visible to. So there's part of Jesus coming down a level. So suppose you decided to come to Palo Alto, and I hear you in Palo Alto, and I say, Alex, I'd love to go down to meet you. And you're staying in a hotel in Palo Alto, and you're on the 5th floor. And I drive down from Healdsburg, and I have to go 3 levels underground to get parking. And we're going to meet in the lobby. Now you're going to have to go down 4 levels to meet me, and I'm going to have to go up 3 levels to meet you. And now we can have a meal together in the lobby. So that's what happens, that these beings, they have to lower their vibration so that they're kind of discernible at a lower level, but only to those who've raised their consciousness up to that equivalent. So there's some place in the middle. So as you're right, walking around the streets of New York, you're not going to see kind of avatars walking around you saying hi to you. So we have to learn how to refocus through altered states of consciousness, and then these beings can reduce the vibration and come down to where we now are at, and then we can have real mystical encounters with them.
Now, going back to the Druid tradition, which I'm fascinated by, in the yogic tradition, in the Vedic and the yogic tradition, when there are masters who reach a certain level of consciousness, they get certain mystical powers. Yes. Levitation, manifestation, biolocation, multiple things that they can do. Is there anything like that in the Druid tradition when the Druids or a Druid master, if you will, yes, gets to a certain level of consciousness? Yes. Is there anything like that that happens to them throughout mythology or history?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. And so the interesting thing is, and you know this as well as I, that in the Hindu tradition, they're called siddhis. But that the great teachers say, don't be kind of, don't be attracted. Don't be attracted by the siddhis. They're just kind of artifacts on the journey. And so they're not necessarily kind of measures of enlightenment. So you have to be really careful that that's not the objective of the exercise, just to kind of somehow foster these gifts. So they may come, on the road. And if they do, if you can learn to use them for the benefit of others, great. But there can be an extraordinary distraction. So with that kind of caveat, then, there obviously are techniques and there are states of consciousness in which we have access to much greater kinds of powers. So I remember, for instance, there was a great novella written sometime in the 1860s called Flatland. Did you ever come across it?
I've heard of that, Flatland. Yes, it's a great book. Yeah. Everything's flat, and then everyone's at the same perspective. Yeah, it's
exactly.
Great.
So there are beings who live on a plane, like a sheet of paper, and they're only 2-dimensional objects. So they could be like a square or a triangle or a circle, but they don't believe there's not a 3rd-dimensional reality is not possible. And then one day, a sphere from a 3-dimensional comes down and tries to make contact with a square, on the 2-dimensional, and he's trying to persuade the square that the 3rd dimension exists, and the square is impossible. If you existed, I'd be able to see you, it can't be true. So the sphere system, I tell you what I'll do. I'll come down and I'll penetrate the plane on which you live. And initially you'll see just a little dot. And then the dot will become a circle, and it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger until I reach my meridian. And then it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it'll disappear. And the square says, okay, let me see that. And so that's exactly what it does. The sphere comes down, penetrates the plane, suddenly a dot appears that the square can see, and now it becomes a circle that he can see, and the circle is getting bigger and bigger, and then at some stage it starts getting smaller and disappears. And the square says, whoa, that is amazing. Is there any chance you could take me to the 3rd dimension? So they arrange it, and he elevates the guy to the 3rd dimension. Now, at that stage, the 2nd dimensional guy, I'll put this back in here. The 2nd dimensional guy said, wow, I wonder if there's a 4th dimension. And the 3rd dimensional guy said, don't be ridiculous. There are only 3 dimensions. No, so we're trapped wherever we're at. Now, I used that example actually yesterday with the resurrection of Jesus. There's a story where Jesus comes into the upper room and the doors are locked. The disciples are inside, and they're afraid they're going to get captured as well. So the doors are locked, and he just comes in. Now imagine Jesus is in the 4th dimension. Or let's lose the flatland. There's the square on a 2-dimensional surface, and the sphere is going to come down. If the sphere intersects with the plane right in the middle of the square, there's a dot in the middle of the square, and then it expands, and suddenly it gets to the edge of the square, and it goes past the edge, and the square is thinking, how did you do that? How did you penetrate my walls? Nothing can penetrate my walls. And the trick is, he's coming from a totally different dimension. Now, if Jesus, in a resurrected sense, is at a far higher level, then this 3D reality is like child's play to him. He can do anything he wants with this. So now you've got the cities. So to go back to your original question then, do you find that in Celtic lore? And the answer is yes. That these druids who are trained in all kinds of arts, mystical kind of arts, will exhibit abilities like shape-shifting, for instance, on a regular basis, or levitation, stuff like that, healing practices. So they'll practice those, but the idea is not to get sidelined by that, but to accept those as part of the kind of the armament for the journey, but that the journey is more important than the kind of the weaponry I'm taking with me.
It's so fascinating that the more I talk to people, the more I have people on the show, the more these ideas, these core ideas just keep coming up and get reinforced. That the truth is the truth is the truth no matter what. And it's not just one way of looking at it. There's multiple people, multiple types of traditions, all going to the same point. We're all trying to elevate, whether it's through mystical Judaism, mystical, what is the ones for Islam? The mystics of Islam.
Yes,
I forgot them,
yes.
but the mystics of Islam, Sufis,
Sufism.
thank you, the Sufisms, and the mystics of Christianity, and the yogis, and we're all going to the same place. It's all just different flavors of the same ice cream.
Absolutely.
It's all the different flavors of the same ice cream. It just absolutely absolutely baffles me sometimes. Go ahead.
I heard a great story one time about Thomas Merton and the Dalai Lama meeting accidentally at an airport. They're going different places and they recognize each other in an airport. And none of them speaks the other guy's language. So they just come up and they hug and they start laughing. And they two are just cracking up. There's not a word exchange between the two of them, but they get it soul to soul. You know, we're on the same journey. It's just two different paths to the top of the same mountain. So when mystics meet, there's total unanimity. When theologians meet, there's cacophony, you know, and religious wars.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. This question's about it's in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if it's Ireland specifically. I know this is more Arthurian legend, but Merlin.
Yes.
Merlin had aspects of obviously paganism and Druid as well, right? Am I wrong? So can you tell me a little, because Merlin is one of those figures that is everyone thinks is an absolute, it's a beautiful story. But there's a lot of historical information that there was a Merlin and he was magical, what would have been magic back then.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting when you think about the notion of magic or miracle. If somebody were to say to me, do you believe in miracles? I'd have to say, what do you mean by miracle? If you mean that God temporarily sets aside the laws of the cosmos in order to indulge the prayers of holy people, I don't believe in miracles. But if by miracles you understand that the cosmos is much more complex than we understand it, and that there are beings and avatars who understand the deepest levels of cosmic law and can work with these cosmic laws, then I do believe in miracles, that they're capable of doing stuff that to the rest of us look like ridiculously miraculous. But they're not miracles in that sense, because that's how the cosmos is set up. And it's interesting, the Greeks spell the word cosmos two different ways. When they spell it with a C, they mean the physical universe of which we're a part. When they spell it with a K, it means the metaphysical universe, of which the physical universe is simply a printout or a hard copy. And so the great mystics understand the laws of the cosmos with a K. And since they understand them, they can utilize them. You know, so it's going to look miraculous to us, but it's not miraculous. It's how the cosmos is set up. It's like if I bring a television set and show it to a bushman in the Kalahari, you know, and there's moving figures talking to each other, he'd think it's magic. He'd think it's totally a miracle. If I give the same television set to a toddler in the United States of America, it's just his babysitter. He's well used to it. It's not a miracle. So we have to understand what's miraculous. It's only miraculous according to the mindset and the kind of limitations of the perceiver, not to the actuality in itself. So then Merlin, Merlin is real. And there's actually a great story in Christian mythology that you heard of the character called Joseph Mar Arimathea. Joseph was the guy who went to Pilate and asked to have the body of Jesus taken off from the cross. There's a theory that Joseph of Arimathea was actually an uncle of Jesus, and that he was a tinsmith, a very wealthy man, and that he traveled all over the world, you know, to tin mines. And there are very famous tin mines in Cornwall, which is southwestern England, which is a Celtic-speaking area, famous for its druidry. And that he would take the boy Jesus on these journeys with him. And so that Jesus would have met the Druids and the Merlins of Cornwall. Also, you know, Joseph Arimathea is going east, you know, and Jesus is meeting Buddhists and Hindus, you know, and to Egypt, the kind of the mystery schools of Egypt. So he's been educated in many different mystical traditions. But he would have come across the Merlin of his time, a druidical figure with the same kinds of powers that the great mystics display, because they understand the cosmos with a K. They're not confined to the cosmos with a C.
You just mentioned the mystery schools of Egypt. I'd love to
Right.
hear your point of view of the mystery, because that's something I've heard about multiple times.
Yeah.
I heard that Jesus, I mean, I've had multiple episodes of scholars who talked about Jesus in India, Jesus in
Yes.
Tibet. I think it was Jesus in Tibet, in India, and in
Yes.
Egypt,
Yes.
that they
Yes.
studied. That was that time
Yeah.
period that
Yes.
was missing.
From 12 to
Um,
30. Yeah.
Right, exactly. The stuff that really wouldn't really work with the story that
Yeah.
they were talking about in the Bible.
Yes.
It would throw a
Yes.
whole lot of things out of whack.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what was in the mystery schools of Egypt? We've already established that the Atlanteans
Yes.
brought that information over there, but from your research and experience, what were the mystery schools of Egypt?
So when I look at, for instance, I look at the world globe and I look at the great civilizations, both in the kind of the Orient and kind of the Occidental, of Meso and South America, and I look at Asia, the great cultures that came from Asia, India and China, and I look at kind of in North Africa, I look at Egypt and places like that, and the Levant, Israel, Syria, Babylon, Persia, places like that. It feels to me like that. Survivors from Atlantis, spread all over the world, and we're trying to raise the consciousness of people who had been totally traumatized. That whatever population kind of was left were absolutely traumatized and reduced to kind of Stone Age. Because for instance, if there were to be a nuclear event, God forbid, in our times, the only survivors would be the denizens of the Amazon, people who know how to live, and just the forest in which they live. But technology would be gone, as we understand it. The buildings would be gone, transport would be gone, television would be gone, communications would be gone. And so that had to be revised again by if there were to be some kind of a remnant that survived it. Now, if Atlantis was a very advanced society, and when I think of kind of the Atlantis, I'm not thinking about technology necessarily about kind of mechanical technology as much as in mental technology, the ability of the mind to manifest stuff. That's more important to me than pure just technology. And so, if a remnant had survived, and now they're visiting the kind of the remnants, trying to find out are there kind of survivor populations anywhere, and wherever they encounter them, they begin to try to build from the ground up. And therefore, they're going to look at, as Jesus did in his life, when Jesus is talking to a group of people, he's identifying immediately who's kind of interpreting this, what I'm saying, literally, who's getting it symbolically, who's getting it esoterically, and who's getting it mystically. And he realizes there's 4 different kinds of audience listening to him, and each group is going to take away a totally different message. Only those who are really mystical will understand the core meaning. So now you get these kind of the survivors from Atlantis, very, very high civilization, spiritually and mentally, as well as maybe technologically. And they're dealing now with people who've been reduced to kind of caveman living. I know they're going to teach maybe agriculture and tool making, whatever. But they're going to spot the kind of those among them who are ready for a higher kind of a learning. I know you have the idea of esoteric knowledge or mystery schools. They're going to call it aside a few of them and say, okay, we're going to do a weekend seminar here. I'm going to elevate your consciousness. So I think the mystery schools that you find all over the Levant, particularly, and in Egypt, were the kind of survivors of Atlantis, identifying subpopulations that were ready for another level of evolution, and that they were, inculcating into that. But they're being very, very careful, because in the past, as we saw with Atlantis, ultimately it led to the demise of Atlantis, that they used even mental technology to destroy the entire kind of experiment. So they're being very careful to make sure that the kind of the new technology is walking hand in hand with a sense of morality and ethics, and that you're not going to put a nuclear weapon into the hands of a terrorist. And so I think, for me, that's what the mystery schools of the Middle East and North Africa represented.
I want to unpack something that you said there that was so beautiful, that they identified in the mystery schools around the world, not just in
Yes.
Egypt, but
Yes.
different kind of that kind of lineage in Mesoamerica and other areas of the world, that there were a portion of the audience or of the populace that was ready to raise their consciousness, but the majority were not.
Yes.
And I've been saying this from the top of the mountain, we are now in the greatest shift of consciousness in the history of humanity as we know it. Even more so, let's say you believe in Lemuria and Atlantis. We are actually shifting at a different level than
Yes.
they were. They might have been more advanced in certain aspects of it, but obviously the ego was really involved with that because it ended to their demise. We as a society now are shifting in consciousness in a large way where this conversation is going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions of people, and people are searching for it. People are wanting to hear these conversations. You've been doing this long enough to know how things have changed. From when you came back from Africa in 88, this conversation would have not happened. Not publicly, at least. Maybe at a bar, or maybe at a coffee shop, or maybe when we were in Vegas in that other lifetime, we might have had this conversation in between poker games and drinks. But but I'd love to hear your point of view of where you see humanity right now and where we're going.
Yeah. Hugely important question, Alex. And so, we're stuck in the West with this notion of time being a linear progression from the past to the present to the future. Kind of indigenous societies didn't believe in that. They believed in a kind of a circular, that there are great epochs, all the way from kind of, a moon, 29 days as we follow the moon cycles, to a year of 365.23 days in the Mayan calendar, to kind of 26.5 thousand years, with the kind of the equinox, the precession of the equinoxes, to kind of the cycle of our solar system around the kind of in the Milky Way galaxy. So that there are kind of cycles within cycles within cycles, but they all tend to be either parabolic or circular. I believe rather in what I call a spiral, that we're not even just going around in circles, because if we're going around in circles, we're just digging ourselves into a rut and making the same mistakes again. So I believe we're going in a spiral, that each time we meet the same kind of situation, we're dealing with it more and more adroitly. But at some stage, even a spiral can go asymptotic. So, if you took a graph and it's climbing gradually, and all of a sudden it goes over a very, very steep climb, and finally there is infinite change in zero time, then it's gone asymptotic. I think a spiral can go asymptotic as well. And I think we're at a stage of the spiral of human history that's going asymptotic. And we're lucky enough to be part of the birthing process. And that's what compassion really means. When you look at the teaching of Jesus, when he says, you must be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. The word he's using in he's speaking Aramaic, is the word rachamim. And rachamim is the plural for the word for a womb. So he's saying you must be womb-like. In other words, you must conceive and carry and give birth again and again and again. And we're not finished giving birth until we give birth to God. That is the entire objective of Project Planet Earth. It is to give birth to God. So at various stages, I first identify with my ego at age 8 months, and then I identify with my name, Seán, and then I identify with my family, and then I identify with my tribe, and then I identify with my profession or whatever. These are all minor misidentifications. We have to keep disidentifying with lesser versions of the self until we finally realize that we are God in human garb, and that our objective is to give birth to God on planet Earth. Our mission is no less than to give birth to God on planet Earth.
Been talking a lot about these avatars, these masters who have walked the Jesuses, the Buddhas of the world. And I've sat there and contemplated sometimes the absolute love that these beings have had for humanity to come down in barbaric times. And the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Buddha were so radical. They're radical today. People today are still having problems wrapping their head around what they said, and the information that they were trying to give us. But I can only imagine in 2,000 years ago, Jesus talking about you are the kingdom of God is within you. Which is essentially you are God. Essentially,
yes,
everything
absolutely.
I can do, you can do, and more. These ideas are so hard to wrap our head around now. Can you imagine with the basic programming of the day, the lack of information, the lack of consciousness at that time? Here, at least, we have some base of information after 2,000 years, but they didn't even have it. And Buddha, even before then, absolute barbaric times for them to come down and sacrifice themselves in a way that they know they're going to get rocks thrown at them. They're going to get,
absolutely.
This is not going to be a fun ride. And yet they did it out of love for humanity. in all the avatars and all the ascended masters do this.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I totally agree with you. That's the essence of love, Alex. It is the kind of the total disidentification. And Paul says it very beautifully in his letter to the Philippians, where he says, have that mindset in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Although he was God, he did not cling to his divinity, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. And being found in human form, he humbled himself, even to accepting death on a cross. That's exactly what you're saying. I mean, how much love can you have where you renounce your own divinity in order to kind of temporarily identify with the deepest, darkest, densest part? And there's this beautiful passage. I'm not a big believer in the creedal formulations of the Catholic Church, but there's one line in the Apostles' Creed that comes from the 4th century where it says, after he died and was put in the tomb, he descended into hell. It's like Christ had so much love that he descended into the deepest, darkest dungeons, of life forms in order to bring light to people who were without hope of any kind. And that in some senses, that's what the avatars all do by coming to planet Earth. But it's also what you did and what I did and what everybody else is doing, that we, who were bite-sized pieces of God, had so much love for the divine that we wanted to experience union by temporarily experiencing separation. Because unless you experience darkness, you don't have a full appreciation of light. Unless you have experienced being away from home, you don't fully appreciate home. Unless you're separated apparently from God, you don't appreciate who God is. And that these beings had the extraordinary love that they could utterly kind of inhabit spacesuits which were so dense and so dark that they could even be gaslighted. And this was this for me was the great temptation of Jesus in Gethsemane, that on the night before he died, Satan comes for one final try and says, you're being gaslighted, buddy. There is no Father. There is no God. You've wasted your time. Get out of Dodge while you still have time. You're going to be a corpse this time tomorrow. It's all made up. It's a crap load. There is no God. There is no mission. You made it up. You were hallucinating. And that's why Jesus sweated blood. For one horrible moment, he's thinking, oh my God Almighty, did I just make this up? Did I dedicate my life to something which is a myth? And then still he's able to say, no, I'm going to cleave. I remember why he came. I'm going to stick with the program.
And in that story, the story of the devil is an analogy. It is a myth of like, there wasn't a literal devil that showed up. The literal Satan showed up. And please, you're more scholarly, I'm imagining, than I am in the Christian and Catholic text. Is it true that there is no hell in the Old Testament? I haven't read the Bible in quite some time. That the concept of hell was brought into the New Testament and really reinforced when Dante wrote that little series of books. Because that's the idea. The idea of hell that we have in popular culture is Dante, right?
Okay, right. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's a great question. Because part of the problem was that when you look at the history of the evolution of the Hebrew scriptures, so they only began to be written down about 550 BCE. And so although they're talking about times which predated that, they're only actually writing their texts about 550 BC. And they're in exile in Babylon. And there's only 2 tribes left, Judah and Benjamin. The 10 northern tribes had been destroyed in 722 BCE by the Assyrian Empire. So there's 2 tribes left. And at this stage, Zoroastrianism is very strong in Persia. And the Persian Empire overcame the Babylonians in 539 BCE and set the last 2 tribes of Israel free to go back to the land of Israel. But while they're in Babylon, they come under the influence of Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism is really, really big into, they've reduced the pantheon of divinities down to 2 gods, the god of light and darkness, Uhura Mazda and Ahriman. And the Jews are picking that up. And when they come back, they've fused the 2 into a single divinity. And so at this stage now, Judaism has no belief in life after death. At that stage, they had no belief in life after death. And so you have to come right down to about the time of the Maccabees, which is about 187 BCE, before there's a notion of life after death. So the idea of hell wouldn't make any sense. If there is no afterlife, we just disappear. Once we die, we disappear. So from 187 onwards, then they're thinking, okay, what does happen, when we die? And so in the books of Maccabees, which aren't included in the Protestant scriptures, but they are in the Catholic scriptures, there are offerings given for the dead. And so the belief system was that those who were destined for an afterlife, rose somehow, and those who were bad dissolved, they disappeared, they have a non-existence. So it's not like there's a heaven and a hell, and one group get the thumbs down and the other get the thumbs up. There's no thumbs down, there's just disintegration. You don't exist anymore. So the idea of an afterlife comes really late into Judaism, and is primarily either a heaven or nothing else. But at the time of Jesus, then, there was an area outside Jerusalem, which was like a garbage pile where they burned all the garbage from the city. And it was called Gehenna. And so there's a constant fire going on there. And so Jesus will use that metaphorically as those people, who are burning with kind of their own self-importance and their selfishness and their non-committal to compassion. He's saying they're going to burn in Gehenna. But he's talking about not about a place of eternal torment. He's talking about what happens when you're in the grip of the flames of addiction or narcissism of various kinds. But that'll be translated then by the Catholic Church as an actual locale, a locale, and that if you don't do what the Catholic Church tells you to do, you're going to get the thumbs down and you're going to spend eternity in hell. So for me, hell does not exist. Hell is a sociological phenomenon that we create intrapsychically or socially among ourselves by the way in which we behave. But it is not an afterlife condition. And heaven is not a kind of a place where you get to, and now I made it, and now you're in seat C137, here's your harp and here's your hymn sheet. Heaven is an infinite gradation of ascending frequencies. As you grow more and more in love, you have a different experience in the afterlife. So it's not like just a one size fits all.
And isn't it true though? The Catholic Church did talk about hell, and if you don't do well, but wasn't there a pope at a certain point go, now there is a hell, but for a price we can get you in. We know the door guy, St. Peter. We could put a good word in for you, and you could walk in. Just pay us. There was there was like a 50 or 100-year period that the Catholic Church buying your way into.
So that was the 1500s. That was the time of that's what Saint Luther, in 1517 when he nailed the thesis, where you could buy indulgences. If you pay to they were upgrading St. Peter's at the time, so you could bring people out of purgatory or save them from hell. So you keep the rules and you pay up, and we get you into heaven. It's like the modern day kind of preachers. You can have a limousine, but send me $100 first.
You can have a limousine, but I need a Learjet to preach. Right. I need a Learjet, so please everybody send me money. Right. And they say it with such confidence. It's fascinating. Absolutely. So I assume that you've been to Vatican City, you've been to St. Peter's.
My faith isn't strong enough to survive Rome.
Oh my! So I've actually been to a place. I've been to Rome. Okay, well, Rome itself, a city, isn't wonderful, but I've been to Vatican City, and when I went to Vatican City, I went to St. Peter's, and I walked in, and it's a stunning place. Phenomenal. It really, you can't deny the awe of what they built. It's just awe-inspiring. It truly is. On a engineering standpoint, on an artistic standpoint, Michelangelo's over here, and it's just amazing. And then I got to go down to the archives or the catacombs, where the popes are buried. They had it open. I just happened to walk in, and I'm walking around, and I'm seeing, there's Pope Luther, there's another pope from the 1300s, and they're all just, and they're just lying there chilling. And then I turn a corner, and I wasn't allowed to take pictures. They said, please, no pictures or video while you're down there. So I respected that. I turn a corner, and I see this room that is ornate in a way that nothing else down there is. Everything else there is very stone, and, it's a catacomb. But this place had artwork. It had a glass door. It's all of this. And I'm like looking, what? Who's in there? And it was St. Peter.
Wow.
It's Peter's remains.
Wow.
So, and I was like, holy crap, seriously. I couldn't believe it was just such a fascinating idea, because in the culture that we live in of celebrity, he's a pretty big celebrity in the scope of Christianity, is St. Peter. But as I was walking out, throughout the entire time I was there, I just kept saying to my wife, I kept saying it to myself, I go, this has nothing to do with Jesus. This has absolutely nothing to do with a son of a carpenter walking around trying to elevate and awaken the people he spoke to. This is so not what he had in mind. I know you and I both love Yogananda, and my favorite quote of Yoga, one of my favorites of his is Jesus was crucified in one day, but his teachings were crucified for the next 2,000 years. And it's so true. I want to ask you what your perspective is on this, because again, since you've been at this longer than I have, you've seen how things have changed. I remember when I went to Catholic school, it was still Catholic school. It was still the Roman Catholic Church, the nuns. There was power. There's no issues with the priests back then. There was none of that stuff going on. It hadn't come out yet. But it seems that people are running away from organized religion in general and opening themselves up to the ideas that you figured out early on in your path. Where do you think this is all heading for organized religion in general? Not just the Catholic Church. We pick on it because we have the rights to. But generally speaking, all of organized religions, fear-based religions, who are more dogmatic and people are just running from. Where do you think this is all going to go?
I think not just religion, but I think the entire world situation is moving into an era of decentralization. I think it's true in our economic models, our educational systems, our medical models, our political systems, our religious systems, that these mega organizations, what I've seen again and again and again is that there's about between 1% and 2% of the population are born as psychopaths, literally. But when you look at the upper echelons of politics, finance, the churches, the military organization, their psychopathology is gravely overrepresented there, that somehow these people manage to get themselves to the top of these organizations. So what I've seen again and again and again with all organizations that start off, with some kind of a mystical or a compassionate impulse, it goes through the following cycle. The first thing is that you get some kind of a really avatar figure, a really compassionate figure with a mystical impulse, a mystical vision. And he's a very charismatic individual. So a group of kind of disciples or followers gathered around him. Stage 2, a group of followers. Stage 3 is this guy is almost inevitably, he's assassinated or killed or crucified, almost inevitably. Stage 4 is the disciples now create a community in his memory. Stage 4. Stage 5 is now this community organizes itself into an organization. Stage 5 is some little group get to the top of the organization, often self-appointed hierarchy. Stage 7 is now they insist on orthodoxy. You have to believe this if you're going to be a member of our group. Stage 7 is if you don't believe what we tell you, we're going to subject you to the Inquisition. We're going to literally tell you, pull your limbs apart. The next stage is if we have enough power, we're not going to lead crusades against the outsiders who don't believe. We're going to convert them or we're going to kill them. Yeah.
In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name, amen.
In Jesus' name, absolutely. And then some new prophet says that, guys, this is not what the master said. So you get Francis of Assisi coming in the 1200s and saying, guys, this is not what the master was about. And he founds a new organization with a new vision called the Franciscans. What happens? Within 200 years, the Franciscans are in charge of the Inquisition. They're pulling people limb from limb. Yeah. So you get the same cycle again. I see the same thing in politics, economic models. So I see that the future of spirituality is in a kind of small communities, kind of like networking with each other, like synapses on a global brain. And that the same thing is true of our economic models, our medical systems, our educational models, our entertainment models. There's going to be much more power at the local level and then interfacing with other groups and learning from each other. I think that's what the shakeup is going to lead to.
And the internet has a big part of that. This interconnectivity.
Yeah, and there was Tyler de Chardin with the noosphere, the kind of the mind sheath. But we need to break through the mind shield then to the anima sphere, which is the soul sphere, and then the pneumosphere, the spirit sphere, and finally to kind of God consciousness itself. So we're only halfway there in this journey back to source.
And I talk about this movie a lot on the show because I think it's just such a wonderful representation of a lot of the ideas and core concepts we're talking about, which is the Matrix, which is, I'm assuming you've seen the Matrix, the movie The Matrix.
Yes.
And Neo, who is basically Jesus, who is also, it's also the One. Literally, his name is the One. Just all these ideas, how he's able to evolve throughout the course of the movie to the point where he becomes a master. and is able then to manipulate the dimension that he's in, both not only the dimension that the Matrix, which is the false dimension, but also he eventually gets to the point where he can do it in the real life, the real world as well. So he becomes all powerful throughout his own beliefs of being able to raise his own consciousness to a certain level. And so I think that's one of those movies that changed
Beautiful. Yes.
humanity.
Yeah.
I think after
Absolutely.
it came out, it just, the ideas it dropped,
Yes.
it seeded the population in a way that has rippled to this day.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Been a long time since I saw it, but I totally agree with you. And I mean, you've an appreciation of movies that I don't have, obviously. I never made that connection between Neo and One. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Well, I mean, and I'll argue the most spiritual movie of all time. What do you think the most spiritual movie, in my opinion, of all time is? And we'll finish it on this. And it came out in the 90s. It came out in the 90s. And it's a comedy.
Let me think about that one. You know, I see a movie about every 3 years, Alex.
Okay, so you might not be the one to ask this question to, but I'll tell you. Did you ever see a movie called Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray?
Yes, I did.
Groundhog's Day is the most spiritual film ever made,
Brilliant.
in my opinion. Do you know why? Because it is a representation of the soul's evolution and reincarnation. And so he starts off like, what will I have if I have all power? I'll eat a lot, I'll have sex, I'll do this, but then eventually he gets bored.
Yeah.
He's like, well, there's only so much, so many, people I could sleep with, and so much food I could eat, and so much money I can spend. Then he starts to try, well, maybe I should help some people. Maybe I should educate myself. And to the point where he finally gets to the end, he evolved to this almost mystical, godlike creature that he is, until he finally able to break free of the reincarnation cycle, and he finally breaks free to then live the rest of his life off normally again. But he has built out all of this stuff. So it's just, it's so much in that movie: parallel lives, multiverse, reincarnation, the soul's evolution. What do you think? I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I love it. I love that interpretation. Says immediately as you were saying it, it brought me back to the Hindu notion of, the different kinds of levels of reincarnation, that we start off, and we're addicted to sensual pleasure. And Hinduism says there's nothing wrong with that. You can enjoy good sex or good wine or good food or whatever. But at some stage, after maybe 100 reincarnations, you think there must be something more to life than just good food. And then you say, okay, power, privilege, and prestige. I need to kind of be a powerful individual, have control of people or whatever. And they say, and there's nothing wrong with that if you can exercise power, with compassion. But at some stage you realize there must be something more to life than just sensory pleasure and power. And then the third series of incarnations have to do with service, that you're compassionately reaching out to others. But then Hinduism says, but even that one is an illusion, because it's predicated on the notion of separation. I can't be of service to you unless I think that you're other than I. And so the realization of moksha, that there is only one. So that's the final series of incarnations, is then the realization of moksha. So that's what I hear you saying in the Bill Murray movie. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful.
It is. Yeah. Seán, I literally can talk to you for another 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. It's been such a wonderful pleasure talking to you. I mean, literally, I can't wait to our next conversation. But since you are a fan of the show and you've watched the show a bunch, that I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests.
Yes, I love them.
So my first question is, what is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Living a full life for me is a kind of lovingly and fearlessly aligning with the mission for which I volunteered as Seán in this incarnation. So being fully in alignment with the purpose for which I incarnated, and I said, yes, send me, here I am.
Now, if you had a chance to go back in time and speak to little Seán, what advice would you give him?
I would say to him that there are going to be lots of disappointments and some tragedies in your life, and you'll find out that they have been the greatest blessings. Harvest them.
Beautiful. How do you define God or source?
Right. So I'm a panentheist in the sense that pantheism is the belief that God is the sum total of all that exists. I don't believe that's true. I believe in panentheism, which says God is the sum total of all that exists and a lot more besides. So it's like conflating Shakespeare with his collected works. So there's a lot more to Shakespeare than his collected works. And so panentheism says, yeah, there's his collected works, but that's not the totality of Shakespeare. There's a lot more. He was a father, or he was a brother, or he was a husband, or, what, a garden, or whatever else he was besides. And so for me, it's more kind of panentheistic. And so I came up with a phrase a few years ago where I say that God is the meta-cosmic womb in which embryonic Christ consciousness is marinated in the amniotic fluid of pure love.
Beautifully said, sir. And then what is love?
Love for me is the source of all that is. So I talk about the 5 L's. There's love, there's light, there's logos, there's a light, there's life, and there's laughter. So I think love is the origin of light and logos. So light is the all matter is literally frozen light. So love gives birth to light, which is matter, and it gives birth to logos, and logos is the morphological agent, that which gives shape to matter. And so if you think of a potter with a lump of clay, the clay is from light, it is light filled, and the potter is the morphological agent that creates a bowl or a cup out of that. So love creates these twins that dance with each other, and in this dance between light, and logos, life emerges. And the objective of life is to learn how to laugh. It literally is. To laugh at the illusion under which we live, and to wake up and realize, that this was an illusion. I bought into it, and I now realize that there is only God. I'm playing a role that God assigned to me.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
The ultimate purpose of life, then, I would say is to set God free from our projections, so God can set us free from our illusions.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world?
Yeah. So my website is spiritsandspacesuits.com. And so, you can find any books I've written, or, Sunday Mass, or homilies I've given, or whatever. So they're all on spiritsandspacesuits.com. Yeah.
And do you have any parting messages for the audience, Seán?
I would say, listen to this guy. Listen to Alex. You're an extraordinary conduit, Alex, for great ideas to be disseminated to huge populations. You're a channel of love, of light, and of logos, as far as I'm concerned. And it's been a privilege to have been able to spend some time with you. And I wish, the best of luck in you're going to reach a much, much bigger audience, because you have a much bigger message than you realize even yourself.
My friend, thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing to awaken the planet. So I appreciate you, my friend.
Namaste.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.